Well, it's certainly a difference from what the president's remarks were a week ago when we saw the racially charged violence in Charlottesville. Let's just take a step back. There were clearly far-right groups in Charlottesville a week ago, far-right groups battling with anti-racist activists, and President Donald Trump said there were fine people on both sides. Today, with this counter-protest that had perhaps as many as 40,000 people turning up, he gave a series of mixed tweets. Let me just read you out a couple of them. The last one was, "I want to applaud the many protesters in Boston who are speaking out against bigotry and hate. Our country will soon come together as one." A fine sentiment. But an hour earlier, President Trump had tweeted, looks like many anti-police agitators in Boston. Police are looking tough and smart. Thank you. Now, exactly why the president may be sending these mixed messages is perhaps a mystery known only to him. But it may be that the president is trying to put an end to the controversy that has dragged on throughout this week. But the president certainly did talk about the protest that we saw today. It was this huge protest, as I said, could be up to 40,000 people. But let's take a closer look. Protests in Boston passed off peacefully Saturday, quelling fears of a repeat of recent racially charged clashes. Thousands came to the famous Boston Common to oppose a so-called free speech rally.
Out! Nazis out!
I came here to stand up for truth and freedom and equality for everyone. I think this so-called free speech rally is basically just the closeted white supremacists who are trying to come out.
The country had feared that Saturday's rallies and counter-protest could be a repeat of last weekend's fighting in Charlottesville, Virginia. The clashes there killed one anti-racism activist and injured dozens more. The Boston police were taking no chances. Bomb squads, canine units, and hundreds of police were there to keep the two sides apart. In the end, only a few dozen turned up for the free speech rally. Organizers had rejected the participation of any neo-Nazi groups. There were no flags or signs of white supremacists. Among the thousands of counter-protesters, there was a mix of militant anti-fascists and opponents of US President Donald Trump. A few confrontations occurred over the largely peaceful day, and that pleased many of the counter-protesters.
Absolutely. Boston is always a great example for protest and really sending the message without any of the icky stuff breaking out.
As the event came to an end, the mood soured. Participants from the rally have been leaving, and there have been confrontations with counter-protesters, and now the riot police is here. There were some heated debates between the two sides.
Keep your mouth shut!
Police escorted the free speech participants away. The Charlottesville standoff between far-right protesters and their opponents turned into a bloody street brawl. Boston's protests Saturday showed it doesn't have to be that way. Now, later on in the day, the Boston authorities have said that they did make 27 arrests. There were some very minor skirmishes with the riot police and some of the counter-protesters. But again, let's put that in context. If we're talking 40,000 counter-protesters and just 27 arrested, I think the day passed off remarkably well. Susan?
That's right, and they had so many police in uniform out there, and it was nice to see that this was so much more peaceful than what happened last week in Charlottesville, Virginia. Indeed, I think the police in Charlottesville, Virginia, as the week progressed, started to take a lot of criticism about how could they have let this occur? How could you have avowed neo-Nazis and white separatists, white supremacists, meeting up in the center of town with groups such as Black Lives Matter and counter-protesters and anti-racism activists? It was a powder keg that was sure to explode. So Boston was taking a lesson from Charlottesville. They were determined to shut the city down and make sure that these two groups were not going to clash. Now, a few people did get into verbal confrontations, but there was nothing like the violence we saw in Charlottesville. And I think that was a relief for America. We had been building up to this free speech rally, so-called free speech rally here in Boston throughout the week, and everyone was afraid that we would see a repetition of last week's violence, and the counter-protesters seemed relieved that there wasn't more outbreaks of violence, one saying that the violence detracts from their message, which is to fight white supremacists, but with words.
Susan?
Alrighty, Toby Muse, thank you so much.